Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to have a discussion about flawed characters in stories. What makes a character flawed? What makes a character flawed in a way that is rootable versus a way that leans into villainous territory? Of course, you could argue that any well-written character should be and is by default a flawed character because human beings are flawed, thus we should see that reflected in the works of fiction that we are picking up. And I don't disagree with that concept, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper than that. I wanted to actually analyze what makes a character flawed, but in a way that feels very realistic, that speaks to something about ourselves, about how we perceive our entire society and customs and culture, and how we progress as well, and the ways that fiction can sort of hold up a mirror to those things. And oftentimes it is through the use of a well-done character that we are able to understand these things on a deeper level. There's a specific book that actually sparked and prompted this idea of having a discussion about this, and I will be referencing this book throughout the course of this conversation. However, this is not specific to this book. You can, of course, take these concepts and apply them, and not just apply them to other written stories, but to just storytelling in general. And interestingly, this specific book is actually historical fiction. Most of the time on this channel, I am looking at fantasy works, but I actually have always said that I feel like there should be more overlap between the readership of fantasy versus the readership of historical fiction, because a lot of what I was describing before about the ways that stories can kind of hold up a mirror to ourselves and help us understand ourselves and our societies. In the same way that that is true, I think, for fantasy, I think it can be true of historical fiction as well, but if anything, in a more obvious way, because it can feel like it was an entirely different world because the world was so different hundreds of years ago from where we are now, but also we know that that's how things actually were. And so then to question how did we go from that to this, I think is an integral part of when you're reading historical fiction. Fantasy, of course, can accomplish this too, and plenty of genres can accomplish these concepts without falling into feeling like different worlds. But regardless, this is actually a historical fiction book. I am going to highly recommend this book because I thought it was phenomenal, but these concepts are more so what I want to focus on. I am going to talk about the book though so that you have more context. So the book itself would be Lady Tan's Circle of Women, and we'll start with sort of an idea of the story so you have some reference points for what I'm discussing, and then we'll kind of segue into the more big picture topic. I do want to note that while Lady Tan's Circle of Women is historical fiction, it is based off of a real woman in history. So I am sort of using the term character only because of the fact that this is a fictional version of what might have transpired within this woman's life, and I'm only kind of using character in reference to this fictional version of her. Of course, because she was a real person in history, I almost feel like there's a need to separate and distinguish between the two. But I really found that throughout reading this, I wanted to learn more about her, and I wanted to learn more about the time period that this story was written in, which I think is an indication of a really well done historical fiction story. But again, just a almost disclaimer that I'm referring to character through this individual in the fictional version. That said, the setup for Lady Tan's Circle of Women is that you are following Tan Yunjin as she is growing up, and you're seeing her from these various different stages in her life, and these stages can be broken down into the roles that women are meant to fulfill in their society, specifically for her, an elite woman, and the roles that she is expected to fulfill. So you see her at the beginning of her life as a young child, you are seeing her into her marrying age, and then you are seeing her at the end of her life. And these three phases are very poignantly categorized in this one moment when the character thinks that her life is going to be within the walls of her father's house, her husband's house, and her son's house when she is potentially someday a widow. Her entire world are those three places, and obviously those three places are in association with the men in her life, because we are looking at a time and place where women did not have as much autonomy and authority over themselves. They didn't really have the luxury of agency. So you're finding throughout the story the ways that she is remarkable in spite of her circumstances. And in fact, the way that it is even more remarkable that she's able to accomplish everything she's able to accomplish despite all of the restrictions that are placed on her. So from a very early age, as an example of a very obvious, noteworthy, and physical restriction, is that you are seeing that her feet have been bound. So the story does not shy away from showcasing those things. Then when she is of marrying age, and she does marry into a home, you are seeing the ways that she is instinctively, because she is a part of a society, and she has had these views really pushed into her from a very young age. You are seeing the way that she is perpetuating certain views in the majority of her life. And then as an elderly woman, there is some reflecting back, but there's also an upholding of things that you as the reader kind of push back on a little bit naturally. You think like, man, why would you want to do, or why would you want some of these things to continue? But the author does such a fantastic job because of how much certain thoughts that are normal for us to have now would not have even entered the minds of the characters within the story at this time. So often within stories, when there is a very obvious difference in the agency of characters for various different reasons, like for example in the Stormy Archive, you have like the light eyes and the dark eyes. In this case, we are looking at men versus women, things like that. When you have these specific roles that people are expected to fulfill, and one has more power over the other, we look at that and we're like, this is so clearly imbalanced, and this is unfair, and you want the characters to feel that the same way you feel like that. And oftentimes in stories, they do. And that is sort of the catalyst for some kind of revolution or rebellion, or our protagonists against the antagonists. And we feel like the characters are justified in their anger and their frustration. But when it is so a part of everyone's life and nobody is pushing back, I feel like that is a great example of how to at least set the stage for a flawed character, and specifically what makes this character so remarkable, because she's not just a character within a society, because then what's the story, right? So the idea is that she is somebody whose grandfather and grandmother actually had a lot of knowledge when it came to medicine, and much of the story is examining not just medicine itself and the ways that people have been treated, but also we are looking at, because everything is so separated by gender, the way that women specifically are not able to be treated very well or very thoroughly because of the restrictions on the relationships between men and women, and also between women and knowledge. So our main character's grandmother is also of an elite status, and she wants to instill in her granddaughter knowledge of things that could help her future self. So from an early age, her grandfather has a lot of knowledge, and he loves her a lot, and so he shares some of this. But he clearly has some views of, like, midwives are lowly people. They come in contact with blood that comes out of women. And you're just like, oh, what? It's like, it's just so baffling from a modern standpoint, of course. And the grandmother is always like, don't listen to him. She's kind of, like, cute in her pushing back against her husband. But she tells her granddaughter there is value in understanding the ways that you can help women in your life, because someday you are going to be a woman in an elite household, and you are going to have ladies in waiting. You're going to have, your husband is going to have probably concubines at some point. All of you are probably going to have children. Some of the children might be young girls. You're going to have servants. It does well for the function of the house when you can treat the things that affect people, but especially the things that affect the women, because the women aren't being as thoroughly treated by these male doctors. So you're seeing this young girl, she craves knowledge from her grandmother. The impacts of this woman in real life are astounding, because she was able to learn so much, and she's one of few women from this time period who we have documentation from citing various different cases, essentially, of things that she treated and people that she treated, and it's remarkable. It's truly, really inspiring. But I think so instinctively we want to take these enormous accomplishments of this woman that existed in history. But again, once again, reiterating, we're going to look at the fictional version of this. We want to take these remarkable accomplishments and we want to make it a little bit prettier. We want instinctively to have this character not only be remarkable in how forward-thinking she was when it came to medicine and the ways that she tried to do what she could, sometimes subtly, sometimes almost behind other people's backs, because she cared that much about ensuring people were healthy and safe. We want to tie a pretty bow on it and also make her suddenly able to see all of the other flaws of her environment. But even though that can be very exciting and rootable, at the end of the day, it's not realistic. And also, where do these enlightened thoughts come from? And in her case, she had the ability, this kind of path that started for her. The first stones were laid on this path through her grandmother and grandfather not only loving her, but wanting to teach her about things. So that door somewhat opened, and from there she was able to make the rest of the path for herself. In other areas of her life, though, she was not able to do that because there was never a door even opened in her mind to the ways that maybe things could be different, and maybe in being different, they could be better overall. Now, really taking from this one and looking at these bigger pictures. What I think makes a flawed character go beyond just like, they're a little bit flawed because they're a person, into territory of, we kind of take issue with some of the thoughts and beliefs that they hold and their actions and their behaviors and the things they uphold. A huge point, regardless of genre, is establishing the setting. In this particular book, if you go into the back and you look at everything that the author did and all the work they put into establishing this setting, you're like, that's why it feels so good. There is a lot of obvious intentionality and care that has been poured into the setting. So before we even get to the character, we have to sort of plant the reader into this space so that they have an understanding of where the character is. Except for, even though we're planted in this space, we can't leave behind the views that we have through modern day, but they don't have that. So you have to really almost go the extra distance to establish the setting in a way where you can feel it. A perfect example of this in this story, that other stories I think have had in them but haven't done it in a way that's as gutting, is the desire to have male children. In other stories, you'll have, almost always, I feel like the way it's framed is that there's a character who it's expected because she's married into a family and she needs to have children. There's this expectation specifically of, give me a boy. That's the feeling. And a lot of times, in this case, you know, if it's the wife, let's say it's like a king and a queen, and it's expected for this queen to have a male heir. There's this feeling of like, if it's a daughter, it's the husband that's upset. And the mother is kind of like, I love my child and I wish my husband could see, which is all fair, of course, because you expect, like, you should love the child. Of course, you should love your child. That's, you know, hands down. I'm not saying like, well, should they? That's not the discrepancy of thought here. But you see so often in stories that it is because it's these patriarchal societies in the cases that we're talking about right now, that the king in this case is like, but I need a son. I need the prince. We need an heir because the girls can't be the heir. It's got to be the boy. And so there's this framing of the mother feels this protectiveness over her child and the husband is expecting a boy. And it's not that that's unrealistic, because that's fairly probably very accurate to a lot of experiences that a lot of people have had in history and also sometimes even today. But I think what this book did that really was shocking almost is that the main character, she so badly wants a son. And when she is having a child, it's so excruciating, which one, I feel like this book does a great job of just showcasing the strength of childbearing and things of that sort. So I really applaud the book for how it was able to capture that as well. But it is so painful and it's so difficult and it's such a risk to even have a child that our main character is thinking, please let it be a boy. Because the idea that she might have to do this again and again and again until she has a son is devastating, because you see the physical toll it takes on her, the expectations of everybody around her to have a son, and their entire elite system functions on there being male heirs. If you don't have male heirs, that's when you bring in concubines, and that's when you hope that the concubines will at least have a son so that the whole system can continue to function. And to have the character giving birth, hoping that she's having a boy, is different from what you usually see, because usually you see it like, no, I'm going to love my child no matter what. And the circumstances are so challenging and childbearing is so painful that this character is like, please let it be a boy. And you understand. You understand why she wants a boy. And I think the word of the day is instinctively. You instinctively think, but girls and boys, it shouldn't matter. They all are valuable. And you're like, actually, this society values boys so much that it ensures that the women want sons as well. It's not this just inherent, I'm a lady and I see inherent worth in everyone, including girls, so shouldn't you see inherent worth in your daughter? It's it's not really done like that. And that is uncomfortable. That causes discomfort in us, and we want so badly for characters to recognize that there is value in everyone, but naturally it makes sense in the context of the story based off of the setting that has been incredibly established why they would feel differently. And this is just one example of things. There are plenty of other things that happen throughout the story that are considered the norm for their setting and society that you really do not like. It's kind of showcasing the ugliest sides of human nature and society and the ways people treat each other. But their setting makes it so that you understand why they hold to certain views. Additionally, you have to also, I think, accomplish their good qualities through something as well. So I talked about how there's the laying of the path that is occurring with this character. You have the grandmother and grandfather both kind of doing a little bit to drop something different into the character's mind than what is around her. So flawed, I think part of what makes them compelling isn't just the literal flaws, but they have to have something good, of course, to juxtapose that against the flaws. And in the case of our character, there is a practicality to trying to treat other people. And because she herself experiences pain, and pain that is specific, when you're looking at this time period, they really much think like these are pains specific to women in this scenario. Well, she is experiencing those things. She's seen the ways that helping other women actually at the end of the day has positive impacts. So she's doing what she can. There is this sort of, and you feel bad thinking of it in this way, but there is a benefit to, beyond just like it's the right thing to do. There is a benefit to treating people the way that she is treating the women in her life, specifically through the use and knowledge of medicine. Frequently, there is sort of this idealized version of good versus bad, and that we should just know when something is good or we should know when something is bad, and it makes us feel very challenged. And this kind of ties back to the idea of stories can hold up mirrors to our own ways of thinking and our own modern societies that are different even from these fantasy ones or these historical ones, is that we don't always want to have to confront the idea that we don't just naturally know good versus bad oftentimes, and it sounds so selfish, but sometimes it really takes recognizing that there is a benefit to doing something a certain way, whether it be you gain something from it selfishly or you see how it's benefiting someone else. And at the end of the day, if they're benefiting from this, then that's going to, it kind of ties back to selfish, but it's going to somehow probably benefit you in the long run in some fashion. Sometimes it takes seeing that, and takes seeing that over and over and over again to establish like, oh, this is a good thing to do. And I'm not trying to get into a whole conversation about the existence of inherent good versus evil necessarily. I'm more so focused on the ways that we see these things through characters and how progress is facilitated through this awareness of this is good versus this is bad, and it being more complex than just something a character knows naturally. So you have to have that juxtaposition, as I was saying, between a character being a product of their society and their setting, and that's through a well-established setting, but also how do they push back on it, and oftentimes it comes down to, is this beneficial in some fashion, and has that benefit been repeated time and time again? I also think another component to writing a well-done flawed character outside of setting is establishing for them a realistic version of agency. Our character, as noted, her world exists within a very small space, and that space is her father's house, her husband's house, her son's house. That's her entire world. How much agency can this character really have? And what are the repercussions of her actions if she goes outside of the things that would be considered the norm or the things that she's expected to do? So and we do see this throughout the setting of the establishment of the repercussions of certain actions, the way that just how people speak of you, how people think of you can have a huge impact on your life and how well you are treated. So we see all of that. And sometimes there is an imbalance. That character in, again, very exciting and fun and still worthwhile stories, that character who recognizes that the system is broken in some way and they want to push back against it, that character they have to have some kind of agency that's balanced against. And that's how I think stakes are often established as well. But there is a balancing act to the agency against the stakes that needs to happen. And in the case of this character, she can only push back so much. So if she is to push back, it's going to look really almost insignificant, almost invisible. It's so subtle. And the thing is, that's what can create really great intrigue as well, is when a character will say one thing and you're like, did they mean it kind of like this though? And then when someone else says something, you're like, I feel like they knew what that person meant, but neither of them can say it outright because they don't have proof. And I think that's a whole other idea of how do you build intrigue. But in the case of this particular character, there is no way that she is going to be able to confront the entire system, and she's going to go up against the Emperor. There is a devastating passage, and I'm going to put up a spoiler warning here. I'm not going to say characters' specific names, but just to make clear why this character cannot have too much agency and the ability to do too much to break things apart. So I'm going to get into this. There will be a timestamp if you'd like to skip ahead. But at one point, this character and another individual who is a midwife end up serving the Empress. There is somebody who is treating the Empress as she is giving birth, and this particular character also happens to be pregnant, and she is having a miscarriage while she is trying to help the Empress deliver her baby. Again, just to be clear, not the main character, this is someone else. The main character is there, though, to try and basically oversee everything as somebody with medical knowledge. So the Empress, though, she sees what is happening to this other character, and it is considered such an affront, it is considered such a disgusting display to have occur in front of the Empress, that this character is severely whipped, beaten basically, because how dare she have this thing happen in front of the Empress. She should have known better than to... And obviously, you're seeing this and you're like, what? But that is the thing that the Emperor... That's actually the injury that occurs, the punishment that occurs is after they have talked him down from just killing the person, because that was actually what they were going to do. And so that gives you an indication of just how much you have to stay in a certain place and role, and how you really cannot. I mean, they so feel so strongly about certain things being seen as unclean or disgusting, or how dare you have this happen in front of this important figure. And it just goes to show the distinctions in class as well. So once you understand that, you're like, oh yeah, she can't just rise up with no army, with no say in anything, and also the physical limitations that she has had since the time she was young. There's no way that she can suddenly just go around dismantling everything that we deem from our modern lens as a problem. So the ways that she pushes back are very, 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 very small, but they have ripple effects. And that, I think, is really significant to having these flawed characters, because you want them to do more. And that's something I think we see so frequently, is like, yep, I mean, you probably could have done more than that. But you also understand the inherent fear that these characters have. And then that makes us connect to them that much stronger, because I think that most, kind of mature people are able to place themselves within the character's shoes and recognize, like, I don't know if I'd want to stick my neck out. And other times we think, like, I mean, you could have done a little bit more. And so finding that space in between those things where you feel for the character and you're like, I mean, maybe you should have done something else, but then at the same time, you're like, I get why you didn't, though. I think that's really significant and really, really vital to having flawed characters that are not only exceptionally well written, but that you feel really connected to. I also think that it's important to note the level of intelligence of a character. And this is something I feel very strongly about in our everyday lives, which is the categorization of intelligence and how we define it. I feel we define it in ways that are rooted in what's the most profitable, and that's not a topic for today necessarily either. But the point is, I think it's important to have there be aspects of the character that are their strengths and their weaknesses, both kind of emotionally and in the intelligence department. But we're going to focus on intelligence because I think the emotional side of things is somewhat rooted in the previous point as well. But when we're talking about the intelligence of a character, they don't have to be intelligent in the ways that maybe are always traditionally valued. That in and of itself can prove to be a really interesting component to how they fit into their world. Maybe they're intelligent in all the ways that the world values, but they're not the right kind of person to hold that kind of intelligence. And then that can be a whole thing in and of itself, a whole story. And that's where you kind of get the underdog thing. Sometimes they are not intelligent of the ways of the world, but they're intelligent in a different way. And a lot of the story is about finding value in that and recognizing that there's beauty in all different forms of intelligence. But what I think is important to note is that intelligence is not present in every way within a character. If you have a character that is math, science oriented, and they're also really good at reading everybody, and they have the highest level of emotional intelligence, and they also have a ton of knowledge about medicine in the case of this story, and they just like, they know everything, they're good at everything, that's not going to make for a great flawed character because you need them to have shortcomings because we all have them. So you have to find certain shortcomings that also make sense to their place, and that once again ties back to the setting. There are going to be certain characters that maybe they would typically be really brilliant when it comes to analyzing literature, but it doesn't make sense for them to know how to read or write. So it's a lot of working through the development of them and what makes sense to their characters. But I think a thing that I find frustrating is sometimes we just decide characters are going to be dumb in certain ways just because we've decided it and we haven't thought about the ways that this is connected to everything else. So we just make them annoying. And it's like, that's their flaw, is that even though they're really smart in this place, they also are just always really obnoxious, or they're really pompous, or whatever the case may be. We give them these flaws just to give them a flaw. It's not tied to their lives. It's not tied to their circumstances. It's not even something that makes sense based off of maybe trauma responses that they would have developed over the course of their life. It's not rooted in any of that. It's just, I'm going to have this character have this annoying quirk, and I'm going to do this because they're not perfect. And when there's not as much care put into where are they intelligent and where are they stupid, when there's not as much care put into that, it just starts to feel kind of surface level. And you can, of course, accomplish a character that maybe you don't dig that deep, because maybe that's not what the story is trying to go for. Maybe it's not a character-driven story. Maybe the characters are even representing these vehicles of themes, and they're not really meant to be something that you connect with on a one-to-one basis. It's more so just, this is here to get to this point. And those stories can be valuable, of course, too. But if we're talking about literally how to develop a flawed character, I think analyzing the ways that they are capable, the ways that they are smart, but also the ways that they are not, it's a thing that can't be overlooked. The last thing I'll note is just that I think that stories like this one are phenomenal, and I highly recommend them. But I also think the safer option for publishing is to have stories where the characters are sometimes a little bit more surface level in what they do and the things they're going up against. And the thing I was describing before about that rootable character that you just want them to succeed against the big bad. There is, again, really want to emphasize, there's value in those kinds of stories, of course. And sometimes you just need that good guy, right? You just need the good character. You just need that person that rises against. But I think that is the safer option, because we are sometimes really quick to want our characters to be flawed in a way where we don't have to interrogate ourselves as much. And the value I find in works like this one, where I am not necessarily defending the fact that this character holds to certain things that I disagree with. I don't agree with a lot of what the character represents and certain things she does and views that she holds. I don't agree with them, and I can be very blunt about, like, I don't like that she did this, or that she wants this, or that she said this and feels this way. I can have those feelings from the comfort of my own home with much more freedom in my own life. So, like, recognizing those things. But I think that we are able to, by going back and looking at characters like this, we can then take this information and apply it to our own lives and our own world. And we can look around as much as possible. We can look around at our situations, and then we can look inward at ourselves, and we can start asking ourselves the tough questions of, if I were to exist 100 years from now, and I'm reading about me in this time, the same way I'm reading about this character in that time, what are the things I would look at and think, those are that person's flaws? That's that character's flaws. What would it be? And that's where I feel like the mirror gets held up and the introspection can occur. And this is why flawed characters, I think, are so, so important in stories. That said, I think sometimes we want the exciting, the fun, the action-packed, and those have enormous value, especially because life can be really tough. And we don't always want to hold up a mirror every second of every day. Sometimes we need to we need to build ourselves up so that we can function, and then we're stronger for it, and we can do the work, and it's not this constant berating of yourself. So there's a balance that we need to find in the things that we consume and the ways that we operate in our own lives, and that's different from person to person. But when it comes to what makes money and when it comes to what's safer, I do fear that the fun and the more surface level representations of some of what we're describing today, those things are potentially more profitable, and that is often what drives what we see and what gets published. So I hope in us kind of really appreciating the craft of developing a flawed character, it can also result in us appreciating the works from authors who are putting in the time and effort to deliver these kinds of characters to us, because it's through these sorts of things that I think we can gain the most empathy and also have the ability to look inward in the most meaningful of ways. Anyway, I feel like this was kind of a little different approach to a discussion about, in some ways, a discussion about a book. It's more like a discussion around a book and an overall discussion, but I thought that this was fantastic. It is not necessarily the most exciting of stories. It's not like you read this and you're like, wow, oh my gosh. It's not really like that. It's very, very quiet and heartbreaking in many ways, but phenomenal. And I was really impressed by this, but it just made me kind of think about a lot of works in general and what makes us feel so strongly about the characters that we're reading about. So if you're interested in this book, of course, I'll have it linked. And also, I hope if you pick this up that you really appreciate it. And I also really would love to know, what's a work that you feel like has accomplished the things that I'm describing, because I would love to see your recommendations. In general, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.